After 9 relentless years of pouring his soul into Apex Grid, John Keller found himself standing outside the very doors he helped open, not as a founder, not as a leader, but as an outsider. When the email came in, cold and clinical, informing him that he was being relieved of his duties as CTO, it didn't feel real. It felt like a misclick, a cruel prank, something that would soon be corrected. But then came the call from Adam Masser, the very CEO he had once brought into the fold, mentored and trusted. And with a voice that barely masked its rehearsed indifference, Adam uttered the words that would break the ground beneath John's feet. "We believe the company needs a different kind of leadership now." Different leadership, a sterile phrase that buried 9 years of blood, sweat, and lost weekends. John had built Apex Grid from nothing, sketching out infrastructure on napkins in cheap cafes, coding into the early hours while his family slept, fighting tooth and nail for seed funding when no one else believed in their vision. He had stayed when the product flopped, when their first hire quit, when cash flow dried up and morale withered. He had stayed because Apex Grid wasn't just a company, it was his life's work, and now he was being told that it needed someone else. It wasn't just a professional blow, it was personal. Betrayal doesn't always come with screaming or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives in quiet meetings, corporate language, and handshakes that reek of betrayal. Adam, who once said, "We wouldn't be here without you," had now decided John was dispensable. There had been no warning, no opportunity for conversation or transition, only a decision made behind closed doors, and a message delivered with surgical precision. As John packed up the few items still at his desk, a photo of his daughter taped to the monitor, a worn notebook filled with system sketches, and the ceramic mug gifted to him on the company's 3rd anniversary. The silence was deafening. The same halls that once echoed with laughter and late-night strategy sessions now felt foreign, almost hostile. His fingerprints were on every line of code, every system architecture, every major decision. Yet, in the end, none of it was enough. Walking out that day, John felt hollow, like a ghost wandering the remnants of a life he used to live. But beneath the shock, beneath the grief, something else stirred: clarity. Sometimes, the greatest betrayals are the ones that free us. And while the boardroom may have cast him out, they could never erase what he built. Apex Grid was his story, even if they tried to rewrite the ending. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for a new chapter. One written not in the shadows of someone else's ambition, but under his own unshakable vision. John Keller stood quietly in the glass-walled conference room as Adam Masser, the CEO he once championed, delivered the final blow with the polish of a seasoned executive. "The board and I feel the company needs a different kind of leadership moving forward." The words fell like stones, heavy and deliberate, but John didn't flinch. His heart clenched, yes, and behind his calm gaze a storm raged, but his face remained composed, his breath steady, his posture unmoved. He listened, nodding slowly, almost clinically, as though they were discussing someone else's fate. Inside, it hurt more than he cared to admit. Apex Grid wasn't just a job, it was a piece of him. He had laid the first brick, written the first line of code, pitched to the first investor. He had given it the best years of his life, poured himself into it at the expense of sleep, vacations, and sometimes even his family. And now, he was being shown the door by someone he had trusted, mentored, and empowered. But John refused to let the pain own him. He had seen too many leaders lose their dignity in moments like this. He wouldn't be one of them. He simply nodded again and stood up. "Thank you for letting me know," he said, his voice even. No bitterness, no sarcasm, just measured clarity. He extended his hand to Adam, who seemed momentarily disarmed by John's composure. Then John walked out, his steps slow and deliberate, not rushed, not angry, just calm. He returned to his office, closed the door gently, and began gathering his things. There was no dramatic farewell, no impassioned speech. Just a man silently packing up a chapter of his life with quiet dignity. He took only what was his: a few notebooks, a model server from the company's early prototype days, and a photo of his daughter smiling in a park. He paused to look around one last time. The monitors, the whiteboard still covered in system architecture sketches, the worn carpet beneath his desk, they all whispered memories he wouldn't forget. But he didn't dwell, not now. Colleagues stopped by, confused by the suddenness. John greeted each of them with a gentle smile, reassuring them that everything was fine. "Transitions happen," he said. "This is just mine." He didn't speak ill of Adam, nor the board. That wasn't who he was. He had built this company with integrity. He would leave it the same way. When he finally walked through the front doors of Apex Grid for the last time, he didn't look back. There were no tears, no regrets shown to the world. Just a quiet, steady man stepping into the unknown with his head held high. Because John Keller knew that leadership wasn't just about building companies, it was also about how you leave them. John Keller walked out of Apex Grid not with a box of desk trinkets, but with something far more powerful: the intellectual spine of the company itself. While the board believed they had removed him cleanly, swiftly, as if replacing a part in a machine, they had overlooked one critical truth. John didn't just contribute to Apex Grid. He was its architecture, its roadmap, its brain. And when he left, he didn't leave empty-handed. Tucked inside his encrypted drives and private notebooks were the original system blueprints, hand-drawn schematics from the early days when Apex Grid was little more than a dream and a stack of coffee-stained papers. He had designed every layer of their infrastructure with obsessive precision, knowing the system better than anyone ever would. He didn't need access to their cloud. He had the underlying logic memorized, the source code versions archived in his private Git repository, the contingencies mapped in diagrams no one else had ever fully understood. Apex Grid had always leaned on his ability to keep the engine running, and in their haste to cast him aside, they had assumed his silence meant surrender. But John wasn't driven by revenge or ego. He didn't walk away intending to destroy what he had built. Instead, what he carried with him was the truth of the product, not the broken branches of the company's bureaucracy, but the seed, the root, the DNA of what made Apex Grid function. In truth, John had always known this day might come. The moment the company took on outside investors, the culture had started to shift, from collaborative to corporate, from visionary to political. He'd spent months watching decisions get made in closed rooms, watching Adam morph into a figurehead more interested in pleasing the board than pushing boundaries. So John prepared. Quietly, carefully, not out of malice, but out of survival. He knew that what he had created, the real value, wasn't in office walls or shares. It was in knowledge, in design, in code. They could keep the name. They could keep the office. But without him, they didn't truly understand the lifeblood of the system. The infrastructure he built was intricate, not just technical, but strategic. Without regular refinement, without the custom scripts he had never fully documented, the system would begin to slow, then stutter, then fail. And yet, John wasn't smug as he walked away. He was calm, measured, empowered. He didn't intend to hold the company hostage, but he understood his worth now more than ever, not as a title, not as a founder on paper, but as the mind behind the machine. Apex Grid had let go of its engine and believed the wheels would keep turning. John knew better. He didn't burn bridges, but he also didn't leave his legacy behind to be dismantled. He walked into the next chapter of his life holding what no one could strip from him: the blueprints of brilliance, the core of the future. And wherever he would go next, he wouldn't have to start over. He already had everything he needed. It started as a single message, a quiet ping from an old colleague on a Tuesday afternoon. "Hey John, sorry to bother you. Just wondering if you might have a minute. There's something in the back end that's acting strange. And honestly, no one here really knows how it's wired." John stared at the message for a long moment, then closed his laptop and walked away. He had expected this. Maybe not so soon, But inevitability has a way of arriving faster when people don't know what they're doing. By the end of that week, the pings turned into emails, then calls. A former engineer called in a panic. "We deployed an update and everything started timing out. No one can trace the failure point." Another one, more sheepish, said, "The new CTO, well, he doesn't really get the system. I think he's overwhelmed." The quiet cracks were widening. John hadn't wished for this collapse. In fact, part of him still cared enough to feel sad watching it unfold. But there was a cold clarity in knowing the truth was surfacing. He had been the invisible scaffolding all along. Apex Grid's architecture wasn't just code. It was intuition. It was a language John had written and rewritten until it became something only he truly spoke fluently. There were no off-the-shelf templates, no simple frameworks. Every layer had been built with custom logic, adapted to evolving needs, fine-tuned based on years of user behavior and internal patterns. Now, with him gone, the people left behind were trying to read poetry as if it were math. It was no wonder they stumbled. When Adam's assistant called, not Adam himself, of course, the tone was different, less confident. "We were hoping," she said carefully, "you might consider consulting for a short time." Just to help stabilize things. John said he'd think about it, and he meant it. Not because he needed to return, but because there was a strange power in being needed after they had let you go. More messages came in, not just about bugs, but about recognition. "You were right," one email said. "We didn't realize how much you held together." Another read, "There's no documentation on half of this stuff. It's like you built it with instinct." They weren't wrong. John hadn't built Apex Grid to be cryptic. He had simply built it from vision. And vision, unlike process, isn't something you can inherit. You have to live it. Watching the company struggle was bittersweet. He took no pleasure in their chaos, but there was a certain justice in it. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need headlines or revenge, just time. John had walked away with nothing flashy, just the truth in his hands. And now, that truth was becoming visible to everyone else. It was a brisk Wednesday morning when John received the email. This time not from a former colleague or mid-level engineer, but from someone far more consequential. The director of technology at Valisync Industries, one of Apex Grid's largest enterprise clients. The subject line was direct and unsettling. "Urgent. Escalation regarding system instability. Need your input." John's heart tightened. He clicked open the message and began reading, each line confirming what he had quietly predicted since the day he walked out the door. Valisync accounted for nearly 17% of Apex Grid's annual revenue. They had been one of John's proudest wins, a client gained not through slick sales decks, but through trust, performance, and countless nights of troubleshooting side by side. John had been there when they migrated over, when they stress-tested the system, when they expanded globally, and needed custom scalability logic only he had envisioned. He hadn't heard from them since his departure, and he had assumed, perhaps naively, that Apex would at least take care of the crown jewel he left behind. But the message made it clear. Things were falling apart. "We've experienced recurring latency issues, followed by 3 unscheduled downtimes in the past 10 days. Your replacement team has been unable to identify root causes. We were under the impression you were still involved. Are you not?" John sat back in his chair, staring at that final line. "Are you not?" It hit him in a way that no board meeting or termination notice ever could. The clients hadn't even been told. No one had thought it necessary to mention that the very person who built the system from the ground up was no longer behind the curtain. And now, the clients were feeling the effects. He replied with professionalism, but not without weight. "I'm no longer with Apex Grid. I was informed a change in leadership was required. However, I'm sorry to hear about the issues. If there's any way I can assist, I'm open to a conversation." Within hours, he was on a call with Valisync's senior team. Their frustration was palpable, not just with the outages, but with the silence, the lack of transparency, the hollow promises from a support team clearly out of its depth. One executive said bluntly, "We signed with Apex because of you, John. Not just the product, but the stability you represented." The words stung, but not in the way one might expect. It wasn't regret John felt. It was a quiet vindication. His exit hadn't just been a blow to his pride. It had fractured the company's foundation. Trust, once lost, is rarely rebuilt, and in enterprise relationships, it's everything. John ended the call with a strange clarity. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even sad. He had become something more powerful than an ex-founder or a dismissed CTO. He had become indispensable. And for the first time since his departure, he realized the future might not lie in reclaiming his past, but in building something new. This time, where no one could push him out of what he created. When John finally decided to take action, he didn't do it alone. At his side was Harper Lang, his closest friend and a razor-sharp attorney, known not just for her legal acumen, but for her unwavering loyalty. They had met in college. She had gone into law, he into code, but their bond had never faltered. So when John called her after weeks of mounting system failures, client complaints, and unanswered questions, Harper didn't hesitate. She cleared her schedule, rolled up her sleeves, and came over with a legal pad and a fire in her eyes. "Let's make this clean," she said. "We don't go in loud. We go in precise." Over the next several days, their quiet war room came to life. They spread out across John's dining table. Contracts, system architecture maps, original design notes, source code timestamps, internal Slack exports, emails with key clients, and product roadmap decks. Everything John had kept for the sake of documentation, or perhaps intuition, now became vital evidence. Each file told a story, not just of technical contribution, but of irrefutable ownership. Harper organized it meticulously. "This isn't about revenge," she reminded him gently. "It's about reclaiming authorship." John nodded. It wasn't pride driving him. It was truth. The board had tried to erase his fingerprints from the story of Apex Grid, painting his departure as a strategic pivot rather than what it truly was, a betrayal wrapped in executive language. But the data didn't lie. From the first line of infrastructure code to the final optimization for their flagship client, John's name was woven into the DNA of the company. The very success they touted to investors had been built on the frameworks, logic, and vision he had designed. Often alone and always unpaid beyond his title. Harper drafted a strategy, a document packet outlining John's contributions, with supporting files marked chronologically. In one folder, she included the signed NDA that had long expired, giving John full right to discuss his own work publicly. In another, she prepared a timeline of technical achievements aligned with revenue milestones, a quiet but powerful reminder of the value he had brought and the risk Apex Grid now faced without him. "I want them to understand one thing," Harper said, tapping her pen against the table. "You didn't just work at Apex Grid. You were Apex Grid." They worked late into the night, alternating between silence and bursts of insight. There were moments John felt old wounds reopening, reading old messages where he'd been sidelined, ignored, diminished. But Harper kept him grounded, kept reminding him of the bigger picture. This wasn't about going back. It was about setting the record straight, about protecting what was rightfully his, and about making sure no one could ever claim his legacy again. By the time they finished, the foundation was solid. The story was clear, and John, for the first time in weeks, stood tall, not as a cast-off CTO, but as the architect of truth, with Harper right beside him, ready to fight if necessary. Anne sat quietly by the window, watching the rain trace soft lines down the glass. The folder Harper had helped her prepare was thick with documentation, screenshots, designs, source code archives, emails, and diagrams. It was all there, an undeniable record of her role in Apex Grid's creation and success. And yet, as complete as it was, John felt no hunger for vengeance. She didn't want to destroy what they had built. even if they had tried to erase her from it. What she wanted was far simpler and far harder to ask for: recognition. Not headlines or a seat at the table, just an honest public acknowledgement that the company's technological core, the part that kept it running, scaling, and innovating, had come from her mind, her effort, and nearly a decade of sacrifice. John had bled for Apex Grid in silence. Long nights, missed birthdays, postponed vacations, stress-induced migraines, all endured without fanfare, simply because she believed in the mission. And now, after being cast aside, the world was expected to believe she had been just another employee, easily replaced. But neither did she want to wage war. There was no glory in lawsuits or smear campaigns, no satisfaction in watching a team of engineers crumble under pressure. Many of them were friends, people she had mentored. The clients didn't deserve chaos. The product deserved to survive. All she wanted, truly, was for the record to be set right. In a call with Harper that evening, John spoke softly, but with clarity. "I don't want to burn it all down," she said. "I don't need Adam to fall. I don't even need them to apologize. I just want them to say it, out loud, that what they have stands because of what I gave. I want to know that I wasn't invisible." Harper paused, then nodded. "That's power, John. Wanting truth instead of revenge? That's real strength." John knew how easy it would be to weaponize what she had. With one post, one leak, one quote to the right reporter, the cracks in Apex Grid's foundation could widen into collapse. But that wasn't the legacy she wanted. The architecture she had built was meant to last, to serve people, to grow. And her heart, even now, refused to turn cold towards something she had poured herself into. So she chose the higher ground. Through Harper, she sent a letter to the board. Not a threat, not a demand, but a statement of truth. Clear, concise, and backed by evidence. It ended with one line that said it all. "I don't want a fight. I want the truth remembered. I want the story told whole, not for the world, but for me." And with that, John let go of the need to prove anything further. Because deep down, she already knew the truth, and those who mattered were beginning to see it too. It began with a single email, unusually short, unusually polite. "John, hope you're well. Would appreciate a quick call if you're open. Adam." John stared at the message, letting the cursor hover over it. For a moment, she thought it might be a mistake. After all, it hadn't been long since Adam, the CEO of Apex Grid and her former co-founder, had looked her in the eyes across a boardroom table and told her, with all the sterile calm of a surgeon, that the company needed a different kind of leadership. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't even thanked her. Now, suddenly, he was reaching out. She didn't respond immediately. But over the next several days, more messages followed. Text, voicemails, even a call routed through Harper. The tone had changed. Adam no longer sounded confident. His messages were lined with urgency, even desperation. He referenced system instability, escalating client concerns, and gaps in internal knowledge. In one email, he offered John a substantial consulting fee, a number that would have once turned heads at any firm in the valley, just to come back and help stabilize core operations. John read them all in silence. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same man who had decided she was no longer necessary was now dangling a blank check to pull her back in. He hadn't said the words, but the truth was obvious. Apex Grid was faltering. Not publicly, not yet. But internally, the machine was seizing up, and the one person who understood how to make it run had been pushed out. She remembered the board meeting, the rehearsed speech, the cold finality of it. She remembered walking out without slamming the door, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she still had dignity left to protect. And now, the person who had once looked down at her was looking up again, this time with a hand outstretched. But John didn't feel triumph. She didn't even feel satisfaction, just clarity. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about being needed. It was about the quiet confirmation of what she had always known. She had never been replaceable. They had just believed the myth that founders could be swapped like parts. Now, reality was settling in. John replied simply, "Adam, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't about a contract. It's about integrity. I left with mine intact. I hope you're now ready to act with yours." She didn't ask for more. She didn't beg for reinstatement. The power had already shifted, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. And Adam knew. John read Adam's messages again, feeling a familiar but now tempered surge of something that could have been frustration or anger, but wasn't. Instead, she felt calm, collected, almost detached. This time, she wouldn't be the one chasing answers or scrambling to prove her worth. She knew exactly what was happening. Adam was trying to gauge how far he could push, testing the waters to see if she might bite, to see if desperation would cloud her judgment. But John was no longer that person. She let the messages sit unread for hours, even days. Every time her phone buzzed with another message or call from Adam, she felt a quiet affirmation of her own value. She was the linchpin in a failing machine, and now the machine's operators were scrambling to find her. Yet she chose silence, not out of spite, but out of strategy. John watched the dynamic shift in real time. As the days passed without a response, Adam's tone subtly changed. His once confident messages became more measured, even conciliatory. Offers increased, not just in monetary terms, but in promises of respect and influence, attempts to lure her back with the recognition that had been denied before. But John held firm. She didn't rush to respond or negotiate. Instead, when she finally did reply, her message was courteous, cool, and succinct, a reflection of someone who understood their own worth and wasn't desperate for validation. Her words didn't burn bridges or slam doors. They simply acknowledged the situation without eagerness or submission. "Thank you for reaching out, Adam. I appreciate your recognition. At this moment, I'm focused on my next steps. I wish Apex Grid all the best moving forward." It was the kind of response that left no room for misinterpretation. She was in control. This newfound poise wasn't born overnight. It was forged from years of dedication, from the pain of betrayal, and from the slow, steady rebuilding of confidence and purpose. John knew she could walk away and build something new, something entirely hers. She knew that Apex Grid's struggles were a reminder to the company, and to Adam, that she had been indispensable all along. By holding her silence, by letting Adam come to her, John flipped the script. She wasn't the one needing the company needed her. And in that quiet, deliberate space of waiting, John reclaimed her power, not through confrontation, but through calm assurance. This was no longer a negotiation for a job or a contract. It was a declaration. John Keller was not just a name on a resume or a founder who got pushed out. She was the architect of Apex Grid's success, and she would decide how and when to engage next. Until then, she held her ground, steady and unshaken, watching as the tides shifted in her favor.